Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros conversation about your company's lack of diversity and the impact it's having on your brand, sponsored by the team at IntroHive. Really excited to have this conversation, really excited to have three wonderful panelists joining us. It's a pretty heavyweight topic, and before we jump into that, we do want to learn a little bit more about our panelists as people learn a little bit about their hobbies and all that. Lyse, Nalanie, and David, thank you all for joining us today. We have a little tradition on Modern Sales Pros. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you. So my question for each of you, and we'll start with Lyse. Anything that you're looking forward to, a restaurant, a vacation destination, anything like that that you're really looking forward to now that the world's starting to open up a little bit more?
Well, luckily, I did what I was looking forward to yesterday. It was the first dinner on a patio that I have had in over a year. I got to tell you, it was the best steak I've ever eaten.
That's awesome. And it was probably fun to figure out where to go to. You're talking to your significant other, and you're like, I don't really care. We're going to go out. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, you know what? We had to make a reservation, and there's a place up here in Toronto called The Keg, and it was good. And my kids came, and we had a really good meal yesterday. So that was something I've been looking forward to. And I got to say, didn't realize how much I love a patio until it was taken away.
Until now, I love it. Well, excellent. Well, Lyse, welcome back. Nalanie, how about you? What's the kind of a destination you're looking forward to, or a place you're looking forward to go to, or went to, I should say?
Yeah. So I am expecting with my first child, and so I'm really excited that you can now get massages again. So that's my first stop, probably next week, re-entering into the post-COVID world. I'm very excited after the baby is born to go and be served in a restaurant with wine and go fully down the wine list.
Excellent. Soon enough you'll be able to enjoy that. And then last but certainly not least, David.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Rich. Thanks to everybody at the Modern Sales Pros team. I actually was able to do this a couple of weeks ago. I'm based here in California, but I was lucky enough to go back to New York City where I grew up, and having that slice of pizza in New York was tasted so good to be able to go there and just pick up a slice of pizza. So that was a nice way to celebrate the end of COVID.
It sounds delicious. I think we've got a good set of adventures we can go on after the panel. We'll do some wine tasting on a patio with maybe some slices from Joe's, and I think that sounds like a great time. All right, folks. Well, we've got a very interesting topic here to dive into. It's very important. Before we jump into that, just a few words about Modern Sales Pros. As I mentioned, Modern Sales Pros is hosting today's event. For those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are folks in sales management roles, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for community members where they can solve problems they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own, see around corners that they may not be aware of coming up, and then meet some awesome people. We do that through bringing together panelists like our folks here today. We have a very robust online discussion, and hopefully in the future, we'll get back to in-person events, which is a great way to meet some folks face-to-face. Everything we do is free for members, and those of you who aren't will be invited to join afterwards. But as I mentioned at the outset, today's session is sponsored by the team at IntroHive. IntroHive has been a great long-term sponsor for Modern Sales Pros. We've had a great opportunity to work with them, and they help you really draw insights from a lot of the data that already exists in your CRM, but specifically understanding the relationships between different sets of folks. IntroHive is also a sponsor of next month's Revenue Excellence Summit. Virtual summits with MSP are like extended explorations of a particular topic. We went a little clickbaity with the title for our July event. It's affectionately known as The Funnel is Dead. This is about the sort of rise of the consumerization of the buying experience in B2B. Intro Hive is a great sponsor for this event, and you'll actually get to see Adam Stewart from Intro Hive talk in depth about how to align taxonomy. You can't really think of your organization as customer in if you don't have really good data on what that customer is doing from every step of their life cycle and the journey, from the first time that they're exposed to your brand all the way until you're advocating. Would encourage you, if you enjoyed today's session, certainly join us next month. We've got, I think, 9 or 10 different content programs that we'll be running over those 3 days all around this topic. But enough about modern sales pros and what we've got going on. Let's meet our speakers here today. Really excited to have these folks in this conversation. Certainly some amazing perspectives that we're going to pull out today. But I'm going to hand it off to David to introduce himself. David, thank you for joining us.
Great, thanks, Rich, and many thanks to the sponsor Intro Hive. We announced a partnership with them a couple of weeks ago around relationship management solutions, and great working with them and being part of today's webinar. So I'm the CEO and founder of Equilar. We're based out here in Northern California. We track data around corporate leadership, and one of the big initiatives that we have within our database, in addition to helping sales teams on trying to figure out, okay, how do you navigate in through the C-suite and board into key decision makers, the data is also being used for recruiting, and we also have a partnership with NASDAQ. We launched the Equilar Diversity Network. Every quarter, we're publishing the Gender Diversity Index that looks at the makeup of women on boards. We're also looking at this from a ethnic diversity background. So we've done quite a bit of thought leadership. You may have seen the Equilar name out in the media, and very excited to be part of today's discussion. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Lyse and let her introduce herself.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Rich, and the team. I'm joining you here from Toronto. I'm a member of the Versant team. Versant is a leader in the SCM space, and we help our clients plan, operate, and pay for their sales compensation. I've been in the talent space for over 20 years, spanning telecommunications, retail, financial services, and technology, supporting organizations from 500 to 50,000. Currently, I'm the Vice President of Talent Enablement at Versant, and my role is to really build evidence-based people programs, whether it be talent management, DEI, or learning.
Thanks, Lyse. And I'm Nalanie Nath. So I work at Insight Partners. For those of you that aren't familiar, Insight is a VC and PE company based in New York. We invest in B2B SaaS companies and have about 250 investments. So I'm a former operator myself, and now I spend my days working with our portfolio companies to help them grow and scale, specifically as it relates to sales and CS. And I think that's really why I'm here today, because I feel pretty passionately that those are two functions where we need more diversity, and we really have a lack of diversity in those functions. So through my work at Insight, I've been able to set up some programs to allow our portfolio companies to plug into that and really drive diversity there. My background prior to coming to Insight was leading global revenue operations at a tech company that had a ton of diversity and great culture that was then acquired by a larger company. So bringing that perspective too. And then I've spent a number of years in go-to-market consulting. So thanks MSP and Intro Hive for having us.
Going to be an exciting conversation, folks, and thank you all for joining us. Two housekeeping notes for our audience here today. We've got these great speakers for about the next 30-35 minutes. Please do use this opportunity to learn and engage with them. If you have questions that are relevant to the topic area, relevant to the backgrounds that you just heard, please do put those in the Q&A panel. Second, this is being recorded. As you heard when you joined, this recording will be made available afterwards, about 24 hours after the event. It'll be on the Modern Sales Pros YouTube page. It'll also be on our own website with the notes and the key takeaways from the program. But with that, I'm excited to jump into this. So this is what we're going to cover today and see where this conversation takes us. First, we're going to talk just a little bit at the high level, how and why this actually impacts your brand and reputation. We'll then dive a level deeper and talk a little bit more about how job seekers, customers, and investors kind of look at and how they think about your organization and its approach to diversity, equality, and inclusion. And last but certainly not least, like this is not an easy problem for a lot of organizations to solve. We want to leave you with a few actionable tips that you can get started with soon to create a more inclusive organization. As the saying goes, every journey starts with a small step. Panelists, we ready to jump in? I love it.
Absolutely.
So let's get started with this. So really, and David, I want to start with you on this point. You know, Dee and I, we talk about this. It's come up. It's kind of an interesting topic to explore. But really, how does this impact an organization's brand, and why does it impact their reputation?
You know, at the end of the day, this has been in the news quite a bit, right? Many different angles for a whole host of reasons, you know, over the past year, if not longer, but especially in the past year. Investors in particular are looking for diversity within the C-suite and the boardroom. And there have been numerous studies that have shown that diverse teams lead to greater returns. So they outperform. And why is that? I'm just looking at our panel here, and it's a pretty diverse panel as we look around at on today's panel. And each of us, we've had different life experiences, right? And we see problems and we see situations differently. And if we were, let's say we were a board of directors or a C-suite ourselves, each of us would bring a unique perspective on a problem. And so ultimately you have less blind spots. And then ultimately that should hopefully lead to better decision-making, which should ultimately lead to better returns. And so that's really, you know, if you think about the crux of why the investor community, why limited partners, why groups are looking for diversity, they're ultimately hoping to help drive better decision-making in the process.
Well, and David, you're uniquely positioned to answer this. I know, like you said, this is something that boards have been thinking about for some time, and we've been hearing about it quite a bit. Is the pace of change like accelerating? Are
Absolutely.
we more quickly here? Okay, good.
Absolutely, yeah. So as I mentioned, we launched something called we call it the GDI, the Gender Diversity Index, and we launched this in 2017. So just looking simply at the makeup of male-female ratio of board members, right? It was roughly 15% female, 85% male. Okay, so not great. It's very far from parity, but then the pace of change was also quite slow. Back at the end of 2017, the ratio of new board appointments were roughly 4-to-1 male to female. So at that rate of change, we wouldn't reach gender parity on boards until 2055. Yeah, it's a long time out there. So yeah, so people weren't happy when we published. It's just simple math. You just say, okay, at this rate, when do we get to 50-50, right? And the other statistic were that across, at least for public companies, the Russell 3000, 25% of those boards didn't have any women on their board. I'm not talking 50%, I'm talking 0. So yeah, okay, so that's where it was 4 years ago when we started tracking this. The good news here is that that percentage of the percentage of women on Russell 3000 board seats, we're now about 25, 26%, so big increase. But the pace of change, which you were originally asking, it's close to 50-50 of new appointments of male versus female. And so we'll reach gender parity by 2030 or 2032. So we brought that in by about 20-25 years. So that's a good sign. So that's at least on the gender makeup. Ethnic diversity, you know, it's roughly what across kind of the Fortune 500, it's about 8% Black, about 3-4% Asian, about same percentage. Hispanic, Latino, but the pace of change is significantly accelerated. I don't have the exact numbers here, but anecdotally, if you look over the last year, and you know, unfortunately, because of what happened in Minneapolis about a year ago, that was clearly a galvanizing moment that helped accelerate the movement on that side. So without question, the pace of change has certainly improved.
That's good data to hear. And Lyse, you know, you bring a unique perspective to this because you've been in the talent space for quite some time, and you've been at companies, like you said, small scale and very large. How have you seen this both change in importance to organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rich. It's interesting because David mentioned how the last year we've had a lot more focus, right? We've been talking about gender equity and parity. We've been talking about increasing ethnic diversity within organizations. And the reality is the volume was turned up over the last year, and we had to pause and take a look at ourselves as organizations. And people and our customers and potential candidates are looking for us to do more than social media hashtags. Also, what's interesting around the last year, or call it 16 months from the pandemic, it's really changed people's perspective about work. And I recently read a report where that said that about 40% of workers are going to be looking to resign from their roles in the next 6 months. They're dubbing this the Great Resignation, because people have taken this past year to say, what type of organization do I want to be a part of? What does that look like? What works for me as an individual? And when we think about the diversity and inclusion lens, we need to now start thinking about the intersectionality of diversity. And so it's no longer a nice to have. If you want to create stickiness to your brand, your employment brand, to attract and retain high caliber talent, you have to be thinking about those intersections and building a culture of inclusion where people can see themselves and see themselves as having value to your organization. So it's accelerated greatly over the last year.
I think that's an incredibly important point when you think about employee retention as well. And it's not just the hashtag or whatever, it's you actually have to walk the walk, which is a little bit trickier.
Absolutely.
And Nalanie, I know this is something that you get to see across not just your own organization, but also those that you're helping out with. How is this impacting specifically, customer perception of an organization or prospect perception of an organization?
Yeah, I think Lisa and David made great points. And to build off of that and talk about the customer perspective, why diversity is important. So when we look at studies that are out there in terms of the makeup of diversity and customer success, so the people working with your customers every day, if you look at 70,000 CSMs, 1% in a study identified as Black and 7% as Latinx, right? So way below what we would see in the population. And that's a problem because your customer base is, not homogenous. And so you need people in customer success that mirror the customers that you're having. I think that's important to grow, retain your business for sure. So thinking about, how diversity really impacts your company. David mentioned some of the ROI right at the board level, but at the functional level too, I think it's very important. CS is the face of your company for your customers too. And so this needs to be representative of who we are across, the country.
I think it's an interesting point. We often think about that from a skill set perspective. If I'm selling to marketers, my CS team has a lot of marketing skills, but we don't always think about it as who are the actual people there. It's not just the skills. Let's double click into this. Excuse me. Let's double click into this just a little bit more as we think about, job seekers and customers and investors. We've got great perspectives here, but Lyse, again, you've got that unique perspective from the talent side of things. What are job seekers really looking at when they think about diversity?
Absolutely. They want to see that you're taking tangible actions, right? Job seekers, they're looking to see, are there others like them in the organization? And that gives them a perspective around knowing, maybe there's opportunity for me to grow my career, right? They want to know that you've looked at your existing systems and restructured them through the lens of equity. And that shows up in their experience through the recruitment process, that shows up in terms of what your employees say about you. Job seekers now, before they will even interview with you, they're doing their research. They're seeing what your employees are saying. They're seeing what your senior leadership team looks like. They're looking at your board composition, and they're making those decisions before they ever say yes to coming in for that initial conversation. So it's really important to not just get people when they've decided to have a conversation with you, but it's important to look at the footprint that you're leaving ahead of time because people are doing their research. They have choice.
Yeah. If I can build on Lisa's point here, diversity, what does that mean, right? There's so many ways you can look at this. And so there's cognitive diversity, right? This decision-making, the experiences, but what Lisa's hitting on is something that the first time I heard this was from the woman at BlackRock. So we all know BlackRock, right? I don't know, what are they up to $9 trillion of, if you're a public company, they're a large major shareholder. If you're a PE firm. There's probably somewhere in the LP stack, they probably have some capital there too. So the woman who runs their proxy vote, the investment stewardship team, her name is Michelle Edkins. And at one of our events a couple years ago, this is all, this is like 2-3 years ago, she coined, the first time I heard it was like visible diversity. And that's exactly what Lisa's talking about, is that, okay, the first thing that people are going to do, they're going to go to the website and they're going to say, okay, well, who's on the leadership team, right? Are there, if I'm a woman, can I break into that, to the C-suite? Is there going to be role models there? Are there people of color in that group? So that is absolutely what Lisa's talking about, is something that, I remember hearing Michelle talk about this at BlackRock a couple of years ago.
The cognitive diversity, great points there. And Nalanie, what are you thinking about here?
Yeah, I would just add, like, even from an M&A perspective too, right? Like if you're in a position where you're thinking about M&A or two cultures are being merged, that was something that when AT&T bought up Nexus, right, we're all looking like, okay, what does the leadership team look like there? How does it compare to our leadership team? So it's not only job seekers, it's, for M&A activity too, combining two different organizations. So important to think about the diversity lens there too.
Well, and I think this is something too, where we've got a kind of unique perspective, both from Nalanie and David here around both of the LPs, right? There's some pressure there as well. David, what are you seeing or hearing from that side?
Yeah. So I mean, Nalanie can probably talk to more of this, but so we also work with a number of her LPs like CalPERS and CalSTRS. So a lot of the number of the the state and city pension funds, right? So they're the asset owners who are then taking taxes they collect to then invest in, whether it's Insight, whether it's investing through BlackRock and others. And if then you think about, okay, who are they investing on behalf of, right? They're investing on behalf of state and city workers, and well, they want to be able to, their community of people that they're representing, it's a very diverse population. And so that's why this is such an important topic, factor for them. And a good example would be Carlisle. I mean, Carlisle, they've published their own study, which looked at, showed that the more diverse leadership teams of their portfolio companies actually had better returns than the less diverse teams. And then earlier this year, they talked about how the more diverse teams, they were going to give them more favorable terms in terms of, from borrowing and whatnot. So you're seeing that not only in the public markets, but also in the private markets. And Carlisle being the kind of out there on this with their team is headed up by Kara Helander, but you're seeing it ultimately coming from the LPs like the CalPERS and the CalSTRS and the city of New York and places like that.
It's interesting. The pressure is kind of coming from, we've got it from the customer perspective, we've got it from the job seeker perspective, we've got it from maybe the venture or the LP perspective as well. So we've touched on a bunch. I think we've set a really good stage here, but let's talk a little bit more tactically, a little bit more actionable about what organizations can get going with today to create a more inclusive experience and environment, right? We spend a lot of time, I think, on the front end talking about, visual or cognitive diversity. Inclusion is an important part of the equation. And I think that's somewhere where organizations can take maybe a step or two more quickly than they can with some of the other things that we talked about here. And Nalanie, let's start with you on this. What are some of the things that you're seeing organizations do to make it more inclusive and more welcoming?
Yeah, I mean, starting with the top of the funnel, right? Like ensuring, even during the recruiting process, a couple different things. One, we're not settling with our recruiters. I know there's a bunch of fellow friend recruiters in MSP that are going to be mad at me for saying this, but really pushing them, like, we need to have one diverse candidate for every non-diverse candidate that we're interviewing here, and like, not backing down on, like, it's hard to find this, but we need to persist on that. So it starts there, and then having a structured interview process. It's not enough to just do a behavioral interview, but there should be a scorecard and a rubric, right? So that we're eliminating some of the bias and thinking through how different candidates are scoring on different aspects of interviews. And then I think from there, the onboarding and recruiting of employees throughout the initial few weeks in the company, from a diversity lens, being the first or the only person in a company is very isolating. And so, it's not enough to just recruit diverse talent. You need to ensure that you're setting them up for success within your organization as well.
I think that the incredibly important part with that is what you said right at the beginning of the job description. So many folks are just, oh, I've used this job description to hire AEs for 10 years. It's like, it's interesting. Have AEs changed in 10 years at all? Is what we're looking for changed at all? I think it's an important part. And there's screen readers and there's things that you can do for free that take almost no time to get a sense of, is your job using, I've seen one that is a kind of masculine language, is it feminine language, right? Are you looking for quota crushers and killers and all that great language there. So I think that's a super actionable tip that folks can take like right now. Lyse, what else are you thinking that folks can kind of get going with and get started with to create a more inclusive environment?
Absolutely. Connect your employee engagement data with your demographic data. That's the first start, because really it's around understanding the employment experiences across the organization. And when you connect those two pieces of data, then you're able to compare and contrast the experience of the dominant group to other cohorts. And within employee engagement, asking specific questions around equity and fairness, or belonging and career development, because that will give you a compass as to whether there are differences and similarities. Also, you can leverage technology such as apps. At Verisant, we have our Simon Gender Pay app. We have our diversity app, which also supports you in understanding your existing processes and practices.
It's an important part, right? Understanding how people feel at work. Another great resource for folks that are interested, HubSpot actually does a very comprehensive diversity, inclusion, and belonging report that they report out on every year. So it can give you a sense of how a big organization is thinking about things, and maybe there's some stuff that you can model in there. David, what about from your perspective? What are some of the best organizations doing to make sure things are kind of inclusive?
Yeah, I'll build on one of the points that Nalanie mentioned about the process. I mean, there's something in the NFL called the Rooney Rule, and if should I maybe give people a little background what that's all about?
A little context will be helpful.
Yeah. So the Rooney Rule is actually named after, was it Dan Rooney? But it's the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so this goes back to 2002 with Commissioner Paul Tagliabue of the NFL and Dan Rooney of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what happened that season, there were two Black NFL head coaches, Tony Dungy and Denny Green at the time. Sorry, my lights went out here. The sensors, but and they were both fired. So at the time, there were no Black NFL coaches, and let's face it, the percentage of Black players in the NFL, I don't know, 75, 80%, right? And so the NFL adopted the Rooney Rule. So it was between Dan Rooney and Commissioner Paul Tagliabue to that any head coaching vacancy at the time, that to make sure that there was a person of color included in the process. And that's expanded significantly since 2002, I believe, roughly when it was adopted. So yeah, just building on Nalanie's point is just really being very intentional about the process, making sure that there are diverse candidates for all roles.
And I think, go ahead, Lyse, sorry.
Sorry, I was gonna just hook into what David said, because the Rooney Rule, it's really interesting, and it's a really good case study for organizations to remember. When you put in a practice, you have to continue to keep oversight and look at the measures around if that practice is still working. Because when it was first implemented at its highest point, there were about 27% African-American coaches within the NFL. Over the years, what now has come to light, it's no longer as effective, and those numbers have dropped significantly, right? So as an organization, it's important to say, yes, we're putting these practices in place, but how are we ensuring that there's appropriate oversight? Because the reality is, when there are loopholes within a system, you're going to find them. So the call out for all of us is, let's not implement a practice and hang our hats on it, but let's really think about how do we ensure that we're staying on top of it so that we don't revert to where we were before.
It's a great point. And the other part I was going to add that builds on top of that as well is the NFL also found that the majority, if you think of the feeder systems, right, you don't just like wake up and I'm going to go coach an NFL team today and you're an NFL coach. It's a little bit more complicated than that. They also found that the feeder systems, right, assistant coaches, college coaches, all of that were not. And so if the NFL's put and they have skills development workshops for folks that are to build that talent pool. So if you look now across different positional coaching groups, offensive coordinators, you're kind of, this would be, you know, for folks that don't know the game, these are your, you know, maybe your director level folks in your organization. If you want more senior leaders and you want to promote from within, have a more diverse group to pull from. And it also goes down, there's organizations like SV Academy and Climb Higher that are solving this at the ground floor of revenue organizations, whether it's customer success, Salesforce administration, sales. These organizations help expand that talent pool, and you can hire from them folks that are, you know, maybe fit a diversity profile that are very junior, that then allow you to build that into your organization. So instead of just looking and saying, hey, we need to get more diversity at the VP level, how do we do that? It's really hard, as we've talked about here. The long-term solve starts kind of at that foundation.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Rich. And what the NFL, so what originally started off with head coaches, that the Rooney Rule policy goes much beyond that and to those roles and deeper on that. But let me share one quick story on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So if you think about, for those old enough like myself, remember the Pittsburgh Steelers from the 70s with, you know, the steel curtain and whatnot. You know, they had, the reason, you know, Dan Rooney was involved with this is that the Pittsburgh Steelers, keep in mind, they're in the 28th largest of the NFL teams, the 32 NFL teams, they're in the 5th smallest, but their jersey sales, you know, memorabilia, all that stuff is actually the 5th largest. They have a tremendous fan base that goes, you know, nationally, internationally, and whatnot. They're the only NFL team where the head coach, they've had 3 consecutive head coaches that have had at least a tenure of 10 years each. So each of their, so it's a continuity in leadership. And what the NFL did, the Steelers did back in the 70s, well before most NFL teams, is that they were recruiting at the HBCUs, the historically Black colleges and universities. So they were drawing from a talent pool that the other NFL teams were not drawing from. And so we're able to, so there's been that culture at the Steelers of really going out and finding the diverse talent, and the business results clearly show that. So I just wanted to highlight, you know, kind of that as a basic case study.
There's interesting, sports have a lot of interesting analogies on this, because it's I think something that's we can wrap our heads around a little bit more. It feels so much harder when it's work versus sports. But I want to come back to actually something that Nalanie, that you had mentioned earlier about kind of setting people up for success and being maybe the first of someone or the first of whatever in an organization. Any tips for getting a 30, 60, 90-day plan in place to get that first person set up so they don't feel some of the emotions that you were talking about?
Yeah. And look, I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers here, right? Like I definitely am still learning myself, but what my perspective is there is like community is just really important. And that can mean community of diverse individuals or non-diverse individuals for this person, but just someone to plug into and have a community, right? That helps retain people, because it can feel really isolating being the first. So when somebody onboards, ensuring that they have meetings with people at different levels of the organization, individual contributors through management, different types of backgrounds and experiences, so that you are setting that community up for them. You know, you don't need to force like a mentorship relationship onto people, but introducing them to as many people across the organization as they can, so then they can start to build their community themselves is just one way that I approach it, but would love others' thoughts if they have it too.
Yeah, it's a tricky. And Lyse, how have you kind of helped get the first, or what would you recommend for folks kind of hiring that first person to set them up for success?
I think Nalanie has nailed it. It's really ensuring that you're building community for the individual, and you're going to do that when you onboard anybody, right? But it's ensuring that they're set up for success. Do they know who to go to? Is it safe to ask questions? Is it safe to also make mistakes when you're new, right? Who do they go to for help? And it's also not just matching them and pairing them with somebody else like them, but it's also expanding their community, to Nalanie's point, and creating sponsors. Because having sponsors when you're new to an organization or when you're trying to navigate an organization is critical to your success.
And can you just double click onto that concept for 1 second? I think sponsorship can mean a lot of business. What does that mean in this context?
Sure, absolutely. So in the context of new person, or even in the context of if you're moving into a new opportunity or you've been in an organization for a long time, a sponsor is somebody who may not be your direct leader, may not be somebody on your team, but it's somebody who has a vested interest in your success. And they're there to represent you when you're not in the room, right? They're the ones who you can ask safe questions to, but as well, they can help navigate the back channels and also create opportunity for you when that might not necessarily be evident to an individual.
It's funny, while this topic is around diversity and inclusion and belonging, that's a lot of good just onboarding content right there too. Like if you set everybody up like that, you'd have a very, very successful, very, very successful organization. This is a spicy question. I like it. I want to tee David up with this, and it's from an anonymous attendee too. So great question. David, let's just start with you on this. How do you get non-diverse executives to take action on this? Like, how do you get them to take it seriously?
No comment. No.
Next question.
Yeah, exactly. No, it is incredibly challenging. This is not, it's painfully obvious that this country is incredibly divided right now. And so I'll speak myself from as a member of the Asian AAPI community. And there've been groups that have been started, like Stop Asian Hate and all these other things. And I mean, I think the intentions are good, but you can't force, telling people who don't like Asians to stop hating Asians is not going to fix the problem. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So to kind of all of a sudden say, okay, you're going to sit in a D&I training session for 2 hours and you're going to come out magically fixed, it ain't happening. So my hopes and prayers through all this is that, we as, kill with kindness and really try to find opportunities and recognize this is not going to happen, fix itself overnight. And it's going to take time. It's going to, we just need to be patient about it and just really, and I think the message of like telling people stop doing this or don't do that, or, you must do this, that you're, if anything, we're creating more division and more anger. And so we just need to recognize that people are going to come at this, at their own pace and just, like I said, just try to figure out ways to bring people together.
I think an important part of that is meet people where they are, and I'll echo. We talk about that a lot as we prepped even for this session, right? We don't have all the answers. We don't even necessarily know all the questions. It's not going to stop us from asking, but it's also when you're ready, we're here, and we've got programs like this. I'm sorry, Nalanie, I saw you just popped off there.
Sorry, I hit my elbow and like made a noise in the middle while you're talking. But
no worries. I was like, oh no, we said something that we're getting a hook.
No, I would just add to that point, because I've always kind of like been someone who kind of pushes a little bit on my executives on these types of things, whether it's women's networks or diversity networks, et cetera. Like where I've found success is like starting small in like baby steps, things that are light lift, light financial commitment, like let's MVP something and let me prove it out as a pilot for you. It's going to be, low lift for you, low lift for me. For example, plugging into a program like SV Academy, there is a financial commitment there, similar to what you'd pay a third-party recruiter, but let's try to get a couple interns here in our company. Let's see if it works. If it works, great, let's expand. So I think finding programs that are light lift that you can plug into, prove it out, and then the executives are like, oh, this makes me look good. This makes you look good. This is great for our organization. Let's run with it. That kind of helps get you there from something that can seem very daunting to an organization to like making it a reality.
I think the other part on this too, right? We can't forget that founders and folks are running businesses too. So tying it back to concepts that they know, maybe it's, hey, we're going to MVP this. That may not be how we think about that, but it's a good way to frame it back to them in their language and meet them a little bit more where they are, and then prove obviously with the results, hey, this is actually working. It's a worthwhile investment. I think. I know with SV in particular, I think the results speak for themselves, but the the folks that graduate, the fellows, are promoted, I think it's like 38% faster and are 17 times more productive than folks that are than the control group. So some interesting results there as well. A couple more questions coming in here. These are all great, folks. Keep them coming. We got folks here for about another 5-6 minutes. Lyse, I want to start with you on this idea of ownership of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. How have you seen that, especially at some of the smaller companies that you've been at? Who kind of owns that, and how do they make sure that there's that consistent drumbeat with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one thing I'll say is HR doesn't own it. And for the talent folks out there, and they're like, oh, no, HR can't. This is not a program. This is not. The reality is, it has to come from the top. It has to be seen as important by the leadership team, specifically your owner, CEO, founder. They have to see that this is driving value to the organization, right? And then from there, you can absolutely have group support. But as you're building out your programs, you're building out your measurements. And when I say measurements, I'm not just saying it's a quota system and numbers, but really around what are we driving at? What are we trying to achieve? How do we track those metrics? And ensuring that each leader has those types of metrics. What does the composition of your team look like? When you think about engagement related to the dominant group and your various cohorts, what does that look like? And again, it can't just stay at the organizational level. It has to go down to the departmental level and then roll up. So the accountability, once you've decided where you're going, has to be pushed through the entire organization, Rich.
Yeah. Can I build on Lisa's comments there? So in addition to the data we're tracking on executives and board relationships and whatnot, big part of our business is tracking compensation, executive compensation. And we were on a panel. I was on a panel yesterday at Stanford Directors College. This question came up, and as Lisa was talking about, literally in the compensation plans of executives, having some type of metric that is measuring the diversity, because you manage what you measure. And so there's controversy, do you do that or not? But I think some companies are waking up, and I believe Starbucks has it in their plan, where there's going to be a certain level of diversity across the organization. And so it's set by the board, set by the compensation committee of the board for the senior leadership team. And you're also seeing the investor community filing what they call shareholder proposals for the annual meetings around diversity. So you're going to have pressure coming from a couple different levels to be able to start to measure some of this and start to see some progress.
One important point to highlight too, that Lyse said at the very beginning of this isn't a project. This is an ongoing thing. You're not like done. Oh, okay, we did diversity. We did a training and now we're good. We're a diverse organization, everybody. Problem solved. Moving on. No, this is a program, and as both Lyse and David explained, it's complex. There's a component of it that's at the leadership level. As David was mentioning, maybe it's even at the executive compensation level. It's a good way to get a lot of stuff done and have your executives pay tied to it. But then there's a part where it is something where you create that culture, and the culture in some ways becomes the mechanism whereby you look at this. It's not just enough to do the diversity project and be done there. One last question, and I want to propose this. Start with Lyse, and then Nalanie, I want your perspective on this as well. If the C-suite, and let's think of this maybe in an earlier stage startup, if the C-suite's not super diverse, and we know that as David was mentioning, that can happen from time to time. How do you encourage maybe more diverse applications to roles? Nalanie, I know you had mentioned the job description piece, but at least what are some things that you've seen organizations do? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there are a few things, and the reality is most C-suites aren't exceptionally diverse. But what you can do is ensure that you're increasing the visibility of your C-suite within the populations and communities that you're targeting, right? What panels are they sitting on, for example? When you think about networking events, are they going to these events? Are they supporting these types of events? And I don't mean just supporting it from a signaling perspective, but it's really around showcasing your organization and talking to the fact that they're inviting various groups to then be a part of their organization, right? Because again, it's around how do we build that pipeline? You're not just going to find a number of VPs and C-suites, but how do we ensure that we're expanding our message to colleges and universities, to various feeder pools, so that our organization can then attract talent, and then we have ways and pathways for them to grow and develop in the organization.
It's a hugely important point. And Nalanie, what else to add here?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I'd say the C-suite more often than not is not diverse. There's one portfolio company that's an insights portfolio, and they have 5 women on the C-suite, and we're always like, how did that happen? And they're like, I don't know, a couple of us joined, and then like more of us just joined, and so that was fantastic to see. But I think, it's okay in early stage companies, often the founder has a network, that network becomes into these roles, right? That happens, that's okay. Are they aware of it? Are they cognizant that like we need to hire diverse people for that next opening? This needs to be a diverse individual, someone with a different perspective. And then in lieu of that, how do we get different diverse voices at the table? So I think that includes looking at an extended leadership team. I've put those together in my operating role before for like the president of AppNexus. What are the other like leadership positions at the company? Let's bring those people to an extended roundtable or leadership meeting that meets regularly. So the C-suite's not just an echo chamber here. We're hearing from different people in the organization. So those are 2 ways I'd approach it too.
I think another thing that we've heard a little bit about is also, especially at the early stage, think of who you've got as maybe your outside board members or board advisors. If it's you and your network of buddies from Stanford and you all did crew together, and you want to build a diverse organization, you could start there. And even if you're super, super small, it's a way to get that perspective into the conversation and take an authentic step to doing that, even when the company is maybe only 4 or 5 people. Last question that we're going to take, and then I want to move us to wrap up because we've covered a lot here. Questions more around metrics, right? We talked a little bit, David. You mentioned kind of Starbucks is thinking about this. What are some of the metrics, David, that you think an organization could be tracking to kind of look at this if they're being successful in this arena?
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly, gender is obviously a pretty straightforward one, ethnic makeup as best as possible, but it's also not only, the board, the C-suite, but really, throughout. Then looking into pay equity and just making sure kind of, okay, equal roles, experience and backgrounds, that there aren't any major gaps on this type of stuff. It was interesting. I remember hearing, I think it was Benioff or somebody at Salesforce talking about how, they're known for doing this, right? In terms of making sure the pay equity, and because they're such an acquisitive company, they have to keep recalibrating, because the new team they bring on or acquire, like their numbers out of whack. So he's just, it's something that, you just need to continue to make sure you're continuously tracking, because for whatever reason, things will slip or move out, get misaligned.
Great perspective there. And I would also encourage the question asker here to take a look at the HubSpot Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging report. HubSpot is a massively data-driven company, and it could give you some ideas of things to look at, where they have, I think, 5 or 6 ways that an employee can self-identify. And then they look at each of the different roles, from like the executive leadership team, the senior leadership team, the director levels, and then the functional managers, split by each one of those. And it's a pretty interesting, and it's HubSpot, so it's visually well done as well. But it's a very interesting way to look at, like, they're a 5,000 person company, how they're thinking about things. It's good, and it's also helpful too for you to think of organizationally, right? What are the things that I need to think about? We've talked about cognitive diversity. We've talked about diversity that I can pick up on visually. They've got some that I hadn't considered: veteran status, parents.
Yeah.
It's not just
disability, sexual orientation, obviously. Yeah.
There's a lot of that in there, and it's just, you're not going to, as we said at the beginning, right? You're not going to get all of that done tomorrow. It's not a project that you're going to snap your fingers or hire one person and get done, but it's a good way to look. HubSpot's been at this for 5 years and reporting this data. It's a great way to see how they've evolved and how they've evolved the reporting here. That went by really fast. Great questions from the audience. Panelists, before we wrap today, I want you to just take a second, collect your thoughts. Just one key takeaway we want to leave our audience with. We try to keep it tweet length. Just we've got folks one little snackable bite for them. Give everybody a second. All right, Lyse, let's start with you. One snackable bite for our audience.
Diversity is not going to solve it all. You also have to think about inclusion.
Love it. I love it. Nalanie?
Yeah, I'd say now is the time. As Lyse mentioned, we have a lot of mind share, right? And so now is the time. If you have an idea, definitely go and pitch it to those executives and see what change we can make together.
And then David?
So we adopted earlier this year, everyone read Measure What Matters by John Doerr, objectives and key results. So think about an OKR around this for you and your company.
Panelists, this is always a very complex topic to unpack. Thank you for making this really engaging for our attendees here today. I know you're all incredibly busy, so thank you so much for giving us your time this afternoon. I hope you all stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks.